Evening, I am Uyayanek and coming to you live from the beautiful hills of Ibiakuran. Today on Spotlight Africa, we see the presidential debate sheds little light on Kenyan polls. South Africa president calls for equal pay for women footballers. We see Prince William pays tribute to slain SA Park Ranger. Over in Zambia, ex-First Lady grilled in anti-corruption drive. Plus, Tanzania bans popular sex enhancement herbal drug. On Africa on the Rise, we see largest rare diamond in 300 years unearthed in Angola. The stories are just all ahead on Spotlight Africa. To stay with us. First in Spotlight Africa today, Kenyans have adopted that Tuesday's presidential debate will be steeped in policy and with sound bites to define the upcoming election. But it's not by one of the main front-runners, Raila Odinga, saw the Deputy President William Ruto appear alone in what quickly descended into a review of the latter's past 10 years in government. Opinion polls suggest the elections scheduled for 9th August will be a tight one between the two former allies. Reports say at stake is the country's faltering economy, rising cost of living, ballooning debt burden, corruption in government, and a high youth unemployment rate. Meanwhile, Odinga has said he will steer the country from a Sri Lankan-style crisis. Ruto has spoken of his bottom-up route to economic recovery. Still in Kenya, the running mate of leading Kenyan presidential candidate William Ruto has lost $1.7 million after that the money held in 4 accounts at a local bank came from proceeds of corruption. Justice Esther Minor ruled that Rigathi received the money from government agencies, but that there was no evidence that he had supplied anything. In a response on Twitter, Gachagua said the judgment did not come as a surprise and that it was meant to undermine his candidature in the elections. He added that the judge was biased against them from the word go and threw caution to the wind by conducting a sham trial. Kenyans will be electing a new president on the 9th of August. Meanwhile, Deputy President William Ruto and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga are the two leading candidates. Meanwhile, a Kenyan minister has said that the shortage of 100 and 200 shilling notes at the banks is due to politicians using the cash to bribe voters ahead of next month's elections. The minister also warned that the next parliament could be captured by individuals involved in economic crimes if they are allowed to use dirty money to buy their way out of the elections. Speaking at a meeting on money laundering and terrorism financing, Dr. Mathiagi said such a move could undermine the war against corruption. He said individuals involved in money laundering and dealers in fake cash could influence the country's laws to protect themselves if elected. Meanwhile, elections in Kenya are often driven by personalities and money more than ideologies, and this year's election is no different. In Tunisia now, where President Kais Saied says draft decrees will be prepared for the holding of an election for a new parliament and a second chamber at the House. It came a day after preliminary results of a referendum indicated a controversial constitution was approved, though turnout had been low. The president noted during a meeting with Prime Minister Naila Bondin the need to prepare a draft decree related to the election of a new parliament and the Council of Regions and Districts. The president also noted that a draft decree related to the Constitutional Court would be prepared in accordance with a provision of the new constitution. Meanwhile, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has said that the country's women's football team deserve equal pay to the men. He made the call at a ceremony to welcome home the female players who had just won the Women's African Nations after beating Morocco 2-1 at the weekend. He urged the country's ministers of finance and sports to increase the bonus. The president said South Africa should outlaw pay discrimination and embark on a program to bridge the gender pay gap. He said many follows a public debate around equal pay in the country after the lockdown decade. Meanwhile, it was earlier reported that the players will receive less money in the prize bonuses than the male colleagues before reaching the quarterfinals of the men's tournament in 2019. Shot and killed outside on Tuesday night during the threat. It said the killing of Nzima, who was head of ranger at the Zimbabwe Game Reserve, highlights the daily threat facing villagers. The Duke of Cambridge said he was deeply saddened by the death of the wildlife ranger, whom he described as a committed person and a brave one too. In the meantime, the UN says it has no evidence so far that its peacekeepers fired at civilians during 3 days of protest against its forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo. 13 people have now been confirmed to have died in violent clashes in multiple towns that targeted UN camps. UN personnel were among the dead. Recall that demonstrations erupted in eastern DR Congo on Monday, with people accusing the UN of failing to contain violent armed groups. The UN Deputy Special Representative in the country, STVNg, said investigations have been sent to help the authorities analyze the bullets in the towns of Goma. Diagne said initial findings, however, showed that the UN peacekeepers exercised restraint as protesters stormed into their bases and burnt vehicles. Demonstrators have accused Congolese security forces of the killings. This comes even as death toll increases after 4 protesters were electrocuted in the city of Uriva, where troops fired electric cable which fell on them. The Security Council has condemned the violence and asked the Congolese to fully investigate and prosecute those involved. Meanwhile, the mission in DR Congo is the second largest force in the world, but has in recent years begun withdrawing and reducing its forces in the parts of the country. To the Democratic Republic of Congo, where police in the eastern part of Democratic Republic of Congo have clashed with demonstrators on a 3rd day of violent anti-UN protest. Officials say at least 17 people, including 3 members of the UN peacekeeping force, have been killed. Reports say protests erupted in the town of Goma as people accused the UN of failing to contain violence by armed groups. The UN warns attacks on its mission on the ground for more than 2 decades may constitute a war crime. Meanwhile, attacks were made on 2 of its bases in Goma and in Butembo, where 2 Indian 3rd member of the UN force were killed. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has strongly criticized African leaders' response to the Ukraine war during a press conference in Yaoundé. Macron hit out at the hypocrisy, particularly on the African continent, that denied the Ukraine conflict was a war. Recall that some African countries have held back from outright criticizing Russia's aggression in Ukraine. In March, 17 African countries abstained in a UN vote to condemn the invasion. He also said that the only solution to Cameroon's Anglophone crisis is decentralization. He was speaking alongside Cameroonian President Paul Biya in Yaoundé. According to journal DU Cameroon, the two leaders also discussed jihadist threats in northern Cameroon with Boko Haram and the conflict between the Cameroonian forces and armed separatist groups. The French president began a three-country tour of Africa on the 25th of July with food security, militant violence, and France's relations with the continent expected to dominate his talks with African leaders. In Ethiopia, victorious Ethiopian athletes have received a hero's welcome in the capital Addis Ababa after their performance at the recent World Athletics Championship, where the country came second on the medals table. Ethiopia finished behind host the US, bagging a total of 10 medals, including 4 golds, a first for the country in the history of the championships. The team was received in Addis Ababa by thousands of cheering supporters. The team also visited the presidential palace, where they met President Sahel Work Nzwende and other notable athletes. Meanwhile, head of Ethiopia's athletics body, Duratu Tulu, has been praised for her leadership during the championship. She said she was proud of the athletes' performance, but warned coaches to expect a stiffer challenge in next competition. To Zimbabwe, we see civil servants have begun a 2-day strike to demand pay increases. They also want their salaries to be paid in US dollars as the local currency. The government is doubling salaries this month, but the unions say the increases have been eroded by high inflation, which stands at about 190%. Schools, health facilities, and government services could face major disruptions, as unions told newsmen that they expect all. Reports say the strike does not seem to have been well observed, with teachers seeming to be at work. The average worker, including doctors and nurses, earn about $200 a month. Meanwhile, the Zimbabwe dollar has lost over 50% of its value since January, partly due to the war in Ukraine. Elsewhere, Zambia's former First Lady Esther Lungu has been questioned over ownership claims of ultra-modern housing units in the capital of Lusaka. The 15 flats near the State Lodge were seized by the Drug Enforcement Commission earlier this month, suspected to have been proceeds of crime. The anti-money laundering agency summoned Lungu after she claimed she owned the flats. She was accompanied by her husband, former President Edgar Lungu. Meanwhile, the former First Family has been on the radar of Zambian investigative agencies in an anti-corruption campaign launched by President Hakainde Hichilema. Critics say the drive is politically motivated. The president, who came into power in August last year, has vowed to recover all allegedly looted resources by the Lungu's regime. For Spotlight Personality, we see Prince Sola Emiko and all of his great works in the Kingdom of Warri. Do stay with us.
Allowed by grossly abused. Our governors have to share police powers with the president as stipulated by the constitution. We do not have a federal government police force. We have the Nigeria Police Force, which shall be administered, organized, and supervised by the Nigerian
citizens of this amazing country, Nigeria, legally speaking. And join us every
Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m.
for Legally Speaking.
Thanks for staying tuned. In Somali, a suicide explosion in the coastal town of Marka, in the regional capital of Lower Shibili, reports indicate that there could be multiple casualties from the blast that happened outside the district headquarters. The Al-Shabaab militant group said it carried out the attack that killed District Commissioner Abdullahi Wafel and some of his security guards. Meanwhile, Marka town is situated 90 kilometers south of the capital Mogadishu. Still in Somalia, where one of the victims include District Commissioner Abdullahi Wafel, the Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab said it carried out the attack. In a separate incident, 6 people were killed in an explosion in the town of Afgoye. In Mogadishu itself, said 2 Al-Shabaab fighters died when their explosive went off before they could carry out an attack. Meanwhile, university students have been injured in Liberia after their protest against the high cost of living was allegedly disrupted by supporters of the ruling party, the Congress for Democratic Change (CDC). The incident happened as the country celebrated its independence anniversary. The protesters included some members of the ruling party who are unhappy with the government's performance. Reports say they gathered in front of the U.S. Embassy as President George Weah attended an official program with visiting heads of state. Meanwhile, an image of a protester severely bruised has been shared on Facebook, sparking outrage. In another development, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said Western countries are to blame for the soaring global food prices and fuel crisis, whilst on a trip to Ethiopia as part of a 6-day Africa tour. He met Ethiopian officials and representatives of diplomatic corps. In his remarks to diplomats, he said problems with the international food market started at the beginning of the pandemic and predates the Ukraine war. He said Western governments use trillions of dollars to buy food without any substantial reason. In a separate development, weeks before the new Zulu king is to be crowned, the royal family is still bringing disputes before the South African courts. However, the most recent court case has been struck off. A judge described an urgent application to stop the coronation of King Msuzulu Kwazent a non-urgent matter. Reports say it had been filed by the king's uncle, Prince Mbonisi Kwapazulu, and 12 others who do not want King Msuzulu to replace his late King Goodwill Zwently, who died in April last year. For more than a year, the family has brought a host of succession and inheritance disputes before the courts, with several members of the royal family forming factions about who the successor should be. Meanwhile, another case is still open, in which members of the royal family dispute South African President Ramaphosa's recognition of King Msuzulu, something by the presidency as a symbolic gesture. It seems like that case will cause a delay to the coronation, which now looks set to go ahead next month. Today on Africa on the Rise, miners in northeast Angola have discovered a diamond they believe to be the largest rough diamond of its kind to be unearthed in 300 years. The Australian site operator named 170-carat stone the Lulu Rose. It said the diamond will be sold at tender by the Angolan State Diamond Marketing Company. Reports say the find in the Lulu alluvial mine was welcomed by the Angolan government. Meanwhile, similar stones, once cut and polished, have sold for record-breaking prices. For our spotlight personality, we see the young king forging noble traditions and a new generation through his progressive leadership. Prince Nsola Emiko was crowned king on the 21st of August 2021, the only Saturday that dated the 21st in 2021. On that day, Omoba Prince Ute Emiko was reborn as the 21st Olu. His Majesty Ogiame Twase III Warri Kingdom has been in existence as far back as 1480 AD, way before there was a state called Nigeria or the era of colonialism. Ogiame Twase III is intent on making clear strides of progress in delineation, ascending pre and post his reign as the 21st Olu of Warri. He envisages a continuum from a glorious past and a potentially even more glorious future. Raised as normal as possible by his late father in the 19th Olu of Warri, Ogiame Twase III is gradually settling into his new role as king. He sees his people, the Isekiris, as a small but mighty people, and is looking forward to making them surpass what. Since ascending the he has been highlighting Warri Kingdom's rich cultural heritage in the lives of the people through initiating, supporting various empowerment programs and training centers. He also expands the influence and prestige of the Isekiris and Warri Kingdom within and outside the shores of Nigeria. And that's all we have for you at this time. Do ensure to follow us on all the social media platforms. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which you can find on our website, spectrumtv.ng. You have been watching Spotlight Africa. I am Uyai Aniekin. Thanks for watching and do enjoy the rest of your evening.
Our governors have to share police powers with the president as stipulated by the constitution. We do not have a federal government police force.